Number 1. I lived in Austin, Texas for most of my childhood, and I had a friend. Let's just call him John. One day, my mom decided to leave me home alone, and being a teenager, I invited John over to play Xbox with me. About 30 minutes into our meetup, we heard a crack that sounded like it came from upstairs. We thought it was one of my cats. I have two, so we didn't pay much mind to it. 3 hours into our meetup, my power cuts off. My friend says he's gotta leave and his mom wants him back. After about 5 minutes, he left. I spent about half an hour watching TV and decided to hit the hay. I woke up at about 2:30 in the morning to what sounded like a muffled scream, and that made me freeze up. I waited for any other sign of noise, and sure enough, I heard the back door open. My dumb self forgot to lock it. This was horrifying. See, I'm a pretty big guy, but I was scared shitless. I grabbed a hammer from my nightstand that I was using a couple days before this to hammer nails into my wall so I could hang some art, but I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps getting closer. I got into my closet and I dialed 911. I basically told them that there was somebody in my house and I was in the closet and to come here as quickly as they could. About 5 minutes passed and I heard him coming up the stairs. He stopped right by my door. I left the Xbox on in my room. I heard him step into the room. Then I heard him freeze. And after about 5 seconds, he ran. I heard sirens and mumbled, "Thank God, man." I heard him close the door, and I looked out the window to see a cop car parked, and I noticed a cop running into my backyard. They saw him. I decided to go downstairs onto my porch, and I saw the man. He was pale as fuck, probably whiter than a cloud, and he was skinny as hell too. The weirdest thing though, this guy didn't have any lips. I was shocked, but if you thought that was weird, well, they got him into cuffs and into a cop car. Then he vomits blood onto the goddamn window. They drove off about a minute later. I later found out he died of a drug overdose that night. Turns out, he was shit high on meth. Number 2. This isn't a scary ghost story, but it's 100% true. In the early 2000s, my best friend and I spent all of our free time racing dirt bikes, finding new practice riding spots. This particular day was super hot and humid, so we decided to head to a new spot that we heard about, which had a long established track, but was totally illegal and right outside of New York City. We were there for a while and the place became packed with other riders. Normally, this would be great, but these dudes were doing their own things, and no one was following the track direction, a recipe for disaster. The entire time we're there, we keep hearing a cell phone ringing, like that old Nokia ring. It would ring like 3 to 4 times, stop, and then a few minutes later, start ringing again. At this point, things are getting pretty dangerous on that track. My friend winds up in a fast head-on crash with a quad. This of course quickly escalates into a full-on physical fight, so I step in and calm things down. The whole time that phone is ringing, only now it sounds very close. My friend is hurting and bleeding pretty bad now and will definitely need to go to the hospital. So I go over to collect his bike and scattered parts and pads from where he crashed, all the while that phone is ringing, but really close now. As I reach for his broken visor in the brush, I smell it, the unmistakable death smell. I'm thinking maybe a dead animal? Then I see the soles of dress shoes, still connected to legs in black dress pants. That was enough. I knew where that ringing was coming from. I left everything right there but his mangled bike and we quickly got out of there. Meanwhile, my friend is like, "Yo, you left all my shit there?" Bro, there's a dead guy in the bushes. If you want your shit, go get it yourself. I'll wait. He understood, and we wound up making a unanimous call to 911 to report it. A few days later, I read that the body was recovered. It belonged to a mob guy, and his family had reported him missing a few days prior. The article went on to state that the area was a notorious dumping ground for gangsters and malfeasance, and was slated to be soon developed. Needless to say, we never went back. Number 3. The black-eyed children of Abilene. Many have claimed to have seen them, have talked to them, or have disappeared because of them. I can tell you for a fact that they are real. This happened when COVID-19 was at its deadliest, and I was home alone while my grandfather was having heart surgery. It was around 10 p.m. and I was home from my step-grandmother's. I had started to make some tea to drink and watch Toonami. I was halfway through a Dragon Ball episode when I heard a knock on my door. My dogs froze and started growling at the front door. My first thought was to put them in the bedroom and open the door, but I felt my dog at the time bite my hand, pulling me away from the door. The knocking continued, and a kid's head peeked through the front window. I could tell it was a little boy. Brown hair, freckled skin, and black eyes. "Ma'am, can you open the door? We came to play with A." A was my sister, and I knew for a fact that my little sister didn't live with me or my grandpa. I felt compelled to open that door again, only to feel my pupper pull me back again. I left the room and went into the kitchen. I could hear them knocking, now also at my side door. My dogs were growling in both directions. backing me into a safe corner of the house. I remember waking up the next day on my kitchen floor with my dogs around me. I still fear that they may knock on that door again, and this time, I won't be there. Number 4. I've been asked to share stories about when I used to do crime scene cleaning, or as we used to call it, trauma scene cleaning. For those of you who don't know what that is, I used to manage a crew that would be called out by different departments such as the sheriffs, police, fire departments, and other private and public agencies after accidental deaths, suicides, homicides, unattended deaths, explosions, fire deaths, and pretty much anything else you could ever possibly imagine that might have happened in a home or a building. Although my stories are not the typical scary stories, I have walked into other people's nightmares enough times, more than I care to think about. However, sometimes I remember a case and I share it on here. This particular one happened sometime around 1998 in Southern California. It was during a very cold time of year and snowed in places that it normally didn't, so it was unreasonably cold for our area. Lots of people struggled to keep warm. I saw a post on Facebook about using your oven to keep your house warm, and I suddenly remembered this call that I was dispatched to. Although I had over the years received similar calls, usually involving elderly people or someone living alone, this time it was a family. The house was in a very working class section in a suburb of northeast Los Angeles, and as far as what the scene looked like, it wasn't my typical blood, gunshots, and body parts kind of scene. We were contacted by a property manager who was contacted by the authorities about what happened to the home. It was a rental home, small, like 2-bedroom house. Like I said, it wasn't a very violent scene and hardly anything really for us to clean up. We got access to the property and we were asked to dispose of certain items, mainly the beds. This was odd to us because there were hardly any bodily fluids on the bed. Sometimes when people die, the rate of decomposition depends on certain factors, so upon first look, it didn't seem too bad. We were only told that the family had all died in the house and that it was an accidental death. Typically, when we hear something about an entire family expiring in the house, it's usually murder or suicide or something tragic like a house fire. This time what had happened was the family was struggling to keep warm. The dad had placed a kerosene heater and a small camping stove type of thingy inside the house. The house didn't have smoke detectors, nor were any carbon monoxide detectors really available back then. The family all went to bed and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. From what we could gather, most of them died in their beds, but maybe one of the kids died on the living room sofa as there were signs of one of them being there. Since the heaters were on the entire time and it was days before anyone checked in on the family, the unusual situation sped up decomposition, and that is why we were called out to the house. They asked us to remove the beds and sofa and any other soft material in the house that smelled like decomp. We ended up having to remove carpets as the owner just said, remove it all. The living relatives came to remove the personal effects from the house, but we had to deal with removing the decomp odor and clean up enough, so it wasn't too bad. When we started on some of the items, you could still see signs that point to where their bodies were. Sometimes when skin comes into contact with the surface, it sticks to it, along with hair and sometimes even eyelashes, and that skin can stick to the fabric. It turns black, almost like a shadow of the person left behind. The coroner usually takes the bodies long before we arrive. However, they do not take everything, and that usually leaves work for us to clean up. The things that haunted me the most about scenes like this one, it's how normal everything looks inside. Just an everyday home that a family lived in, doing their best to struggle and live. Unfortunately, not knowing that those types of heaters inside will cause you to die. I can remember seeing inside the kid's room, yellow stuffed animal bear on the bed. The kid probably went to bed with it the night she died.